Hello, hello, hello. Thank you on behalf of the Faith-Based Initiative. I'm LaTanya Gonzalez with Freddie Mac, a secondary mortgage company that purchases loans from the primary market. In addition, we provide financial capability information. Tonight, we have a great surprise for you. All the information that you ever needed to know about estate planning is here for you tonight. But I would be remiss if I did not thank all of the Freddie Mac Borrower Help Centers, all of our housing counseling agencies, members of Full Gospel Baptist Church, Bill Brew Consulting in the Mississippi Delta, and the Mississippi Housing Partnership for joining us tonight. And the reason why we do this is because of our church members that have supported this initiative from the beginning. I would like to introduce you to Pastor Cedric, who will welcome all of our guests today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gonzalez, Mr. LaTanya. This is Cedric Hughes Jones Jr. I'm the senior pastor of the Mount Zion Baptist Church of Philadelphia. Just briefly, it's an urban church, 110 years old. My first three predecessors, the first three pastors were there for the first 95 years, and I've been there the last 15. I met the person I'm going to hand it off to, Herman Palmer, at the Wharton Business School, where we were graduate students earning our MBAs. At that time, I had acknowledged the call and have spent the last, now this is my 40th year in ministry, being both bivocational for the first 25 years or so, which means that I worked in the corporate world and engineering and other things like that. And for the last 15 have been, my lead vocation has been the senior pastor of the Mount Zion Baptist Church of Philadelphia. Raised in Charlotte, in case anybody is from the Southeast and the Queen City in particular, lived in and worked in Cincinnati, studied in Boston and Cambridge, as well as lived and studied and worked and raised three kids in the greater Philadelphia area. I say all that so that you have a context both for what few remarks I'm going to make, but also so somewhere in there maybe you can connect in. My passion for this work is Herman and the National Foundation for Credit Counseling pulled us together based on Herman's network and based on the strength of his vision and contacts. We kind of all came together a few years ago. I'm personally proud of the fact that the Mount Zion Baptist Church of Philadelphia, along with a sister church, the Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church, whose pastor is a colleague and widely known across the country and even the world, the Reverend Dr. Alan Waller, and his minister who has been connected to this, Kevin. And so I say all of that really so, again, to paint a picture. What is important to me, both as a pastor, as a person, as a father, as someone who has had parents to make the great leap from the rural sharecropping South to college graduates, and then anything that I've been able to do as a result of standing on their shoulders. My mother died 2 years ago now, actually 3 years ago, in February. And my mother was always very wise about her money. She did the kinds of things that she knew of to do at the time. She was heavily invested in insurances. She believed in that, and quite frankly, we're the beneficiaries of that. She also had a shrewd business mind, and my father's family were landowners, and really due to his wisdom and my mother's savvy, we inherited some land, and which is great. But what you're going to learn tonight is some different ways of actually taking care of that land. So my parents were not business people like that. My mother was, did create and run a large piano studio in Charlotte. But basically my people were educators and church people. And yet they did more with less, if I were to be blunt. And I think that the challenge for those of us who have been bequeathed something I don't know your story, wherever your personal story is, but there is a relationship you have with money, and you've got some things that you probably inherited. When I say that in terms of teaching and other things that are important. And I hope that our time together tonight, as you experience something, will provoke you or evoke you to actually be inspired to do even better with what has been bequeathed to you. The journey of the Bible, particularly in the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament into the New Testament, is often about what's been bequeathed. And so many of us of the Abrahamic faith, that is Jewish, Muslim, and Christian in particular, know that God promised Abraham to be, through him, all the nations and families of the earth would be blessed, depending on your translation. But part of that also had to do with land. It had to do with the promised land. It had to do with issues regarding assets. And so it's so important in the biblical story for people to whom much has been given, much has been required. You reap what you sow. The book of Proverbs encourages men, and it's a male orientation in this, to deal with grandfathers bequeathing something to their children's children. That's enough of some faith-based stuff. I think I just need to tell you that you're in the right place at the right time. There's no shame in this game. What it is, though, is an opportunity for us, wherever your faith stance is. But for those of us who are Christian and believers, we know that we are stewards. We don't own anything. Naked I came into this world, and naked we shall go out. But we can steward what God gives us to steward, pass it on to our children in the most wise and most efficient and cost and tax efficient way, and even to our children's children. So that even if they never get to know you in person, that because you are a good steward of what God has blessed you with, that you will be blessing them. And I trust tonight that what you'll learn from our presenter tonight, and also from Herman Palmer, who I'm going to pass it off to now, will be something that you'll be able to connect, not just a financial wealth, asset protecting, asset building issue, but to connect it to the faith and what you are bequeathing to those whom are a part of your progeny, part of your loved ones, whether biological or otherwise. God bless you. And if you're ever in Philadelphia, 50th and Woodland, or wish to find us on the various social media ways, it's the Mount Zion Baptist Church of Philadelphia. Brother Herman Palmer, we're in your hands.
Thank you, Pastor Cedric. I appreciate you. Thank you for those comments. Good evening and welcome, everyone, to this evening's faith-based presentation. This is the Faith-Based Alliance presentation on wills and estate planning. And for all you newcomers, I give you a special welcome. This evening's event is part of the National Foundation for Credit Counseling's Faith-Based Alliance Economic Empowerment Series. I want to start by thanking our planning committee, our presenter, our sponsors, and certainly you, our listening audience. As you've heard, my name is Ron Palmer. I'm the Vice President of Outreach and Inclusion for the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, or we call it the NFCC. Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about the NFCC. Our mission is to empower consumers to address their financial challenges and take charge of their futures. We're focused on delivering better financial outcomes. We have close to 300 member offices serving all 50 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico, with over 50 member agencies and over 1,100 certified counselors. We help everybody: multicultural communities of color, military families and veterans, small business owners, student loan borrowers, just to name a few. There are areas of counseling that we support, which include general financial counseling, housing counseling, which includes pre-purchase counseling to get you in a home, foreclosure and eviction prevention counseling to keep you in a home, and reverse mortgage counseling. We offer small business owner coaching. We have student loan counseling to help struggling student borrowers navigate the complex repayment options that exist, and bankruptcy counseling. I'm always excited when we have the community to address the subject of tonight's presentation. I get excited because I think it's very timely. Wills and estate planning. This is the topic few, if anyone, wants to discuss. But as soon as it's needed, we often find ourselves either ill-prepared or totally unprepared at a time we can least afford it, a time when we're dealing with loss, and we are very likely at our most vulnerable emotionally. For this reason, it's very important that we take the opportunity to make our wishes known, record them using legal documents. Now, before we get started with the presentation, I want to review some of our ground rules. First, this is a safe space, a space that is provided for all in attendance to get access to the information they need to achieve better outcomes. What that means is there is no judgment. You can ask any question you have. Chances are, if you have the question, it's occurred to 3 or 4 others. You've all tuned in for one reason: to get insight and information. Help us get you the answers to your questions. If you don't ask, we can't answer. And this next part is really very important. There are no dumb questions. Keep that in mind. So ask anything. There will be a very brief survey at the end of this session. I ask you to please help us out and respond. It's brief. We're working to build the best program possible, and we can only do that if you make your opinions or your suggestions known. If you are interested in learning more about or in joining the Faith-Based Alliance, there'll be an opportunity at the end of the presentation to learn how to do so. If you're looking to help create financial better outcomes for people, individuals, communities, we'll be glad to speak with you and collaborate with you. Now, with all that done, it is my pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, Aimee Griffin. Aimee is the principal of the Life and Legacy Counselors Estate Planning Firm, which seeks to educate and facilitate the creation, the protection, and the transfer of wealth. Life and Legacy Counselors stand on the core value of FIRST. That's F-E-R-S-T. Faith, excellence, relationships, service, and trustworthiness. Here's a harsh reality. The racial wealth gap continues to grow, and land within the Black community is dissipating with each generation, as only 30% of Black people, that's 30%, have an estate plan to strategically grow and pass wealth to the next generation. Creating a legacy through estate planning discusses the strategies and opportunities to build. Aimee's goal is to build strong communities, one family at a time. Her mantra is, we are better together. It's my pleasure and my privilege to introduce the speaker for this evening's Wills and Estate Planning presentation, Attorney Aimee Griffin. Aimee, please come forward and educate the people.
Well, thank you so much. I have a couple of questions because I think we have not the correct slide. And so can I share my screen? Is that possible?
I defer to Eric.
Eric?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Correct. And tell me if I am. Am I sharing?
Yes, you're good to go.
Okay, all right. So I realized the distinction because I saw my firm logo on it, and I'm here representing not my firm today, but the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals. And part of that is that I created a nonprofit with a mission to bridge the racial wealth gap. What we know is so many people don't have an estate plan in our community. 70%, as Herman reminded us. That means we cannot plan financially for after we're gone. That means that so often the resources that we spend on probating, as well as the conversations that we have with our lawyers, which of course I am thankful for, are things that take away from the estate. take away from the families. And so I'm thoughtful about how do we create an estate, an organization that is strategic about creating alliances with people who are committed to economic empowerment through the creation, protection, and transfer of wealth. So the ABEP, the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals, is a collaborative organization. And we have the Association of African American Financial Advisors, the National African American Insurance Association, National Bankers Association, and others that come together to collaboratively bridge the racial wealth gap. And so we know that we're better together, as Herman pointed out. I wanted to point out the impact of not planning, what that looks like and what that means. And I'm going to use Philly as an example because our Pastor Cedric led us off. But if we were just simplistic enough to invert the statistic from 30 to 70, and we focus on about 2,000 families, the impact would be $360 million plus in legacy impact for our families. Right. So if we identify that the median home value is 183,000. In Los Angeles, again, that where the median home value is 200,000, there is, and the impact of 2,000 families is $400 million in legacy impact. And DC, where the median home value was 646, that legacy impact is almost $1.3 trillion. So you see that by focusing on just the minimal of the real property, if we think about estate planning, the impact is so significant for our families. And so now I love doing this because as Herman shared with you, our first core value of our firm is faith. And so when I get to do my Kingdom Legacy, the Kingdom Legacy presentation, I get to throw scripture in because it's not what I say, it's what he said, right? And this is what the Lord says: put your house in order because you're going to die and not recover. So now we know for you pastors to say, well, he did, pause it. So he had 15 more years. And that's what I say to people who, when you create your estate plan, it's not just a matter of you need it today, but you're going to need it someday. And so having it in order doesn't mean that you're going to need it today, but it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. And so I encourage people to always have your stuff straight, that preparedness piece. And then what is estate planning? Estate planning is that holistic approach, holistic consideration of how do you manage what you have, what are the values that impose. It answers 3 specific questions. The first one being, what happens when you die? So many times people say, I don't really want to care about that because I'm going to be dead, it won't matter to me, right? The second one is, what happens if you can't take care of yourself? That we do care about, because we want to identify who's going to care for us. Who's going to be that one? Is it going to be somebody who cares about us or wants to know what we think for ourselves? But the reason why I love estate planning, the reason why it excites me, it's empowering, is because we get to answer the question, what's the legacy going to be? We get to be transformational and thoughtful and strategic about that. Write the vision, make it plain on tablets so that a runner may read with it. I love this scripture because it means that we're supposed to have a vision, right? And we're supposed to have a vision that's bigger than ourselves, that we're not supposed to be able to complete because someone else has got to run with it. If it's big, if it's just enough for us to complete, God didn't give that vision up. Now, mind you, I am not a professional theologian. I'm just a girl who loved the Lord. And so with that being said, I believe God is saying to each one of us, write the vision, make it plain so that others can read it. Now, as a lawyer, I know that if it's not written, it doesn't count. So, so often the scriptures that we have such a powerful impact, but it's only enforceable if it's indeed written in a way that is appropriate. Now, I say that legacy building is such a personal thing that we each get to make an impact based on our thoughts, dreams, and desires. Now, my law firm used to be called the Griffin Firm, but I realized it wasn't about me and it should outlive me. And so we changed the name to the Life and Legacy Counselors. Right? The bottom left-hand corner is a picture of my children and my children's children. Now, I love my children, and God said to us, leave an inheritance for your children's children. What you don't see on here is my children's spouses. Now, I believe that their parents should have them in their presentation. I focus on my children's children. And so we're able to create capacity for what we choose to, right? Now, I am a member of Kingdom Fellowship AME Church, and I'm sure all y'all on here are connected to the most amazing church ever. Why I always point that out is I'm a tither and I give offerings. When I pass away, I will continue to. And we need to be thoughtful about how do we support our congregants to do the same thing. They can't if we don't give them the capacity, the understanding, and the education to build that out. I keep telling people that it's a matter of building capacity. You should continue to have your income producing when you've passed away. So we should continue to be tithing when we've passed away. But if we don't know how, we're not going to. And then finally, the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals was it was a nonprofit that I created because that's a part of our legacy. We get to be thoughtful about how do we build for the future and how do we change the world, right? So we're supposed to have an impact that is greater than ourselves. As Herman said, we're building strong communities, one family at a time. And let all things be done with decently and in order. What we know is we have the tearing down of families, the breaking apart of families because of the lawsuits that ensue. So many times I have people calling my office saying, I'm not talking to my brother, my sister, but you need to give them this information. If we don't encourage, support, enable our community members to have everything written down in order, then we know that what's going to happen will be a mell of a hess. So we get to help them see what it is, because so often they just don't know. Right? Like James Brown. James Brown, now granted, his whole family structure was a bit of an issue, right? They wasn't quite sure if he was married to the fourth woman or not. But what I know is in our community, that is not atypical. We get married without getting married and we get divorced without getting divorced. And that was part of the confusion with James Brown. And it took over 15 years to identify what his estate was going to look like and how it was going to be managed, because they didn't know who was his wife and where things should be going. So, and again, although he had a lot of money and a lot of attention, we all know families that look like that. And so I encourage us what we know is if it's written down, it takes out a whole bunch of the confusion, clarity, and so we're able to build it out in such a way. Martin Luther King, these are four significant, amazing people. Well, impactful people, I'll say. Martin Luther King didn't have a will, but I think part of that was because he didn't, like so many people that I talked to, they say they don't really have enough to justify having an estate plan. He was not wealthy during his lifetime. However, when he passed away, he had significant notoriety. His Bible was so substantially valued. His intellectual property was so amazingly valued. But there was so much litigation between his children because of the fact that he didn't have a plan. And so I encourage people that we don't look at where we are as a limitation, but we look at the possibilities that God has for us, and then we build out the plan accordingly. Aretha Franklin is just was an amazing queen of soul. However, she was frugal when it comes to trying to decide how to get an estate plan done. She decided that she just needed to write it out for herself. She, of course, took great pains and had the greatest funeral of the century. However, when she passed away, there was significant distress because folks found, the wills underneath the couch, in the cabinet, multiples that she had handwritten. The problem with that was it took a lot for folks to try to determine which was the last one, number one. But the other thing about that is she didn't have any guidance. And by not having guidance, one of the things, the pitfalls that happened is her estate paid $8.1 million in taxes. And so if she had had an estate planning attorney that could have given her guidance, there would have been tax mitigation, and charities would have been the recipient of some of those assets instead. But she didn't plan accordingly. Steve McNair. Now, I don't know if anybody on here is a sports person. Now, I'm not, but he's a great story. So I definitely always try to bring him in because he's a great story. Steve McNair was a football player. and he played for the Ravens. I'm based in the DMV, so it's an easy conversation to have folks get all excited about who he was. Unfortunately, Steve McNair was killed, and he was killed by his mistress. So I tell people that the first lesson to learn from this is don't have a mistress. But the second part about that is his wife became his executor of his estate. And as she was managing the estate, she acknowledged the fact that he had purchased a house for his mom, but he didn't pay it off in total. It had a mortgage. His wife decided that they were not going to be able to afford that mortgage. And so his mom ended up having to move out of the house. My favorite shero is Osceola McCarty, and I find a reason to put her in as many presentations as I can because she's an example of what little can do. This woman was a laundry woman. She wasn't a big wage earner, but she was a strategic person, and she was indeed frugal. She lived in southern Mississippi, and she didn't have central air conditioning. She had window air conditioning. She was quite content, actually not having an air conditioner at all, but folks decided to bless her with that, blessed her with a color TV. She didn't have cable. When she had two customers, one of which was an estate planning attorney and one was a financial advisor that supported her to make to create a trust that grew and that had some matching funds. And she left $150,000 to the University of Southern Mississippi. She also left money to her church, and she left money for her family. But she only could have done this because she had an estate plan. And again, I always encourage people to be thoughtful about to whom much is given, much is required. We are blessed to be a blessing. And she was thoughtful in so doing. But
Aimee, let me just say one thing.
Yep.
To our listening audience. If you have any questions, anything that you want to share, or any insights you want to glean, feel free to enter your question or comment in the chat function, and we'll pick it up and share it. All right. Sorry, Aimee.
Oh, not a problem. Not a problem. And so one of a warning scripture is anyone who doesn't provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Now, I think that is the most condemning conversation that compels us to do something mindfully to get our affairs in order. And so what we know is a lesson from Osceola McCarty is we invest in the things that are important to us. If we plan, we ought not wait until we are 70, 80 years old to make our estate plan. We should make it from the time that we know that we want to create, instill values in others. What we know is that the greater the runway, the higher the altitude. We can create the best plan if we have thoughts about it. If we're writing the estate plan and we're on our deathbed, there's not much that we can plan for. There's not much that we can build. There's not much that we can set aside. Now, the foundational documents that create a foundational plan are these. And you should have these when you first become an adult. And when I say first become an adult, that's the age of 18. Right? I've had people say 50, 60, or 30, or when you have assets. When you have a life, that's when you should have your first estate. Have the authority of a life is when you should have your first estate plan. Now, the first document that you should have is what we call is a durable power of attorney. That durable power of attorney gives somebody authority to act on your behalf for financial matters. It's as broad or as specific as you choose it to be. And I encourage you to be very thoughtful about who that is. And knowing that you should have a backup for whomever you appoint, because you don't know who's going to be there when you need them to be. The power of attorney is valid up until the date of your death or until you change, right? You can remove that person and replace the person you put in and make a change. The second part of this three-legged stool is a healthcare packet. The first one, again, is to identify someone who will speak for you if you cannot speak for yourself regarding your health decisions. Unlike the power of attorney, the healthcare proxy is only when you cannot speak for yourself. With a power of attorney, it can be at any time. I can be completely capable and have someone appointed to speak on my behalf. The second part being the HIPAA waiver is the who do you want to be informed about your health care, but not necessarily make any decisions, right? So if you want just if you have your spouse who is speaking for you, but you have children, adult children or siblings that you want to be informed of, and they can talk to your healthcare providers, they can look at your medical records. That's what the HIPAA waiver does. And then there's the advance directive. The advance directive gives people the directions of what you want to happen. It identifies the rules that you want in place. If you would want to be on a ventilator, if you would want to have pumped hydration and nutrition, that's what the advance directive does. And then the end of life plans. If you want to have a cremation, if you want traditional burial, I encourage those folks to be as clear as you can be. I had a mom call me because she wanted to sue her son-in-law for, as she said, burning up her baby because her son-in-law cremated his wife. Grief and greed are the two G's that we need to guard against. And I see Herman Palmer. So I think there must be a question.
I just want to identify when you mentioned the HIPAA waiver. I think people need to understand, and the example is, one you shared years ago, where there was a young lady who was in a car accident in college.
My daughter.
Right. I didn't want to call that out, but okay. And, we send our children to college with the greatest of expectations and dreams. And we just think, I'm mom, I'm dad. That's always going to be my baby. But the world doesn't look at your baby as a baby. They look at your child as a young adult. And when they turn 18, they become a legal adult. And God forbid, if a situation happens and they're in the hospital, you can't just show up and expect to be informed about their case. So with that in mind, I think we have to be very intentional about when we send our children to school, we also understand the implications of what that means. So you want to make sure as you're on campus, you get that HIPAA waiver. So God forbid, you can be informed and maybe even make decisions about the level of care or what happens. The other thing, selfishly, having, being a father, you also want to get access to those grades because I want to make sure I'm getting a return on my investment. I don't want there to be a party every night, but.
And that's the FERPA waiver, right? That's the Family Education Right to Privacy Act. And so that's the waiver you need to get for the school so that they can share with you all of the information of your student.
She's good. She's real good. Okay, I'll be quiet.
That's right. And so that's one of the things, again, as we speak about what is really important is what is being mindful. Again, the HIPAA waiver is the Health Information Privacy Act, right? Portability Act. So being thoughtful about it. And then the third leg of that three-legged stool is the last will and testament. And that's if we're just, again, talking about if we are talking foundationally, right? We'll go beyond that in a bit. But these are the three foundational documents that we should have at the age of 18, because, again, at the age of 18 is when you become a legal adult. So now who's going to handle your finances when you're not able, right? Who's going to manage your bills? What we do know is your rent or mortgage is still going to need to be paid. Your car payment will still be made. Your utilities will still be paid. They will turn all of that stuff off, even if you're in the hospital, right? So you want to have someone who's going to manage those things appropriately. Just because Pookie is your oldest child, he is not necessarily the one that you want to identify as to manage your stuff. I always tell people that your child is not going to all of a sudden rise up and not need the money that they've been asking from you for every month to make the ends meet. It's not going to change right away, right? I'm a person of faith too, so I believe there can be a miracle. However, until you've seen it actualized, when people show you who they are, believe them, right? So I encourage people, again, to identify someone who has the integrity, has the necessary resources, and doesn't need to borrow from you to serve as your power of attorney, and then have a backup to that backup. If somebody has not started managing their own checkbook, don't let them start with managing yours, right? Then identifying who's going to be that one who's going to be the one to care for you when you can't care for yourself, right? Now, what we know is, for those of you who are old enough to remember, there was a young lady in Florida named Terry Schiavo. And this to me is one of the most extreme experiences. She was in a persistent vegetative state for 15 years. Her husband said she would not want to live this way, and we should not continue to provide tube she shouldn't be fed by tube for hydration and nutrition. She was able to breathe independently, but there was no perceived brain activity. Her mom said, however, she's fine as long as she breathes and she's living, and we're not going to allow her to die if we can do anything to keep her alive. So after 15 years, the Florida Supreme Court ruled on the side of the husband and said that Terry would not have wanted to live this way. And so they allowed her to die by not providing for her nutrition and hydration. And so you get to make that decision for yourself. You know, I think about identifying someone who loves you, who can make that decision for you, but identifying those guidelines. You don't want to put them in position to have to make a decision where oftentimes I've had siblings say, I'm not speaking to my brother anymore because he killed my mama by pulling her off life-sustaining treatment. You've got to make that decision to provide the peace for your family. Right. And then again, I love the slide from the Diary of a Mad Black Woman, identifying those people who not necessarily have your best interest to heart, identifying you're serving your husband, right? Now, like the last will and testament. On TV, they have the reading of the will, right? So when someone passes away, they call you into the lawyer's office for a reading of the will. And I tell people, that's just TV. That's not really what happens in real life, because the reading of the will doesn't mean anything happens. The reading of the will is just me reading to you. You can read it just the same as I can read it. But what happens when someone passes away with a will, they have to go to the court, and the judge will sign an order to appoint the executor to be the one to manage the estate. Now, let me go through. That's what we call probate. Right? And so what probate is transferring assets that are in your name out of your name. If you own something jointly, it may just go to the other person, like a bank account. Or if you're married, a house can go to your spouse. However, if there is not a way for someone to get it without, you don't have to sign anything, then it has to go through the court system. Now, if you have a will, then the court will manage based on what your will says. But let me tell you the other part about that. If you don't have a will, then it still goes through probate. I mean, either way, it goes through probate. However, it's a formula that's applied. And depending on which state that you live in, each state gets to make its own formula. So if you have a spouse and you have kids, it goes, percentage goes to your spouse and a percentage goes to your children. If you have a spouse and parents, sometimes it goes to your spouse and then it goes to your parents. It depends on which state that you live in, and it's all relevant, right? And so I encourage people to think about how is it that you would want to manage manage your assets. The other piece, I feel like the probate is one of the best governmental scams we've got going, because the process includes, first and foremost, let's say I passed away, they would take my will, if I had one, to the court, and upon the court will say, what are the value of Aimee's assets going through probate? Based on the value of the assets, that's how they determine the court costs. The more assets they have, the more they pay. You have to pay the courts, right, as court fees. The second thing they do is they put a notice in the paper, typically for 3 weeks, that said, Aimee died, does she owe you any money? Now, then you have a certain time frame with which to say that Aimee owes you money. And if I was in the hospital before I passed away, the hospital will chime in. If I have any credit card debt, the credit cards will chime in and send in the notice. And then, because of course we have to wait for those that time period for the creditor's claim to come forward. And then you have to wait again, because once they are paid, once the hospital's paid, the Sears and Roebuck is paid, then they have to notify the court that they was paid, and then you can give distributions. And depending on the jurisdiction, it may determine how that happens. In Maryland, where I'm currently sitting right now, it's a state that has an inheritance tax, much like Pennsylvania has an inheritance tax. And actually, I'll talk about Pennsylvania. Now, no matter to whom you leave your assets to, there is an inheritance tax. In Maryland, it's depending on the relationship. Certain relationships have an inheritance tax and some of them do not. And so that's why they need to have a level of specificity to determine who gets what, where, when, and how, so that they can determine what the taxes are. So they're very thoughtful about ensuring who's going to get who's making sure the taxes are paid.
Okay.
Amy, I had a quick question. If a house is involved in the transaction, does it make probate go faster?
Oh, no. Not at all. And so it's all contingent upon, now again, the different jurisdictions are, so if there is a house, so let's say I have a house and I have like $300,000 in equity. Let's say I have a hospital bill that's $70,000. The house may need to be sold to manage the distribution or paying that bill. So all of those things work together. As long as you have more assets than you have liabilities, those things need to meld.
Amy, let me ask you
this
this.
impacts our wealth. Thanks,
Oh,
Herman.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yep. So probate seems like a bad deal. Is there any way you can avoid probate and or inheritance taxes?
So that's my next slide.
Oh,
right. Okay. So I encourage people, because I feel like probate is one of the greatest scams. You can avoid probate by putting transfer payable on death designations on your bank accounts. You can avoid probate by, depending on which jurisdiction that you live in, with your real property, by doing transfer on death deeds or life estate deeds. That means you retain ownership during your lifetime, but when you pass away, it passes on to whomever you identify it to. Right. And so that's one of the ways you don't have to pay court costs, but which are based on the value of your assets, and it avoids the probate process. So therefore, it's not considered as an asset for which you can pay those creditors with. So that's one of the ways that I encourage people to definitely avoid the probate process to preserve those assets going forward. Not to mention, who wants to pay the court costs? Who wants to pay the publication costs? Because remember I said there's a notice that goes in the paper for the readers. You got to pay for that. The court doesn't pay that. You pay that. And so that's why I encourage people to avoid probate at best. So the foundational things, You're on mute, you're on mute, you're on mute.
sorry. So that handles the probate piece. So on the inheritance tax, if I have a transfer on death deed, or if I have bank accounts payable on death, does that also avoid the inheritance tax?
It does.
Going to be starting something. Okay.
So those are gifts. That tends to be a gift. Right.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. That's new.
Right. So when you go beyond the foundation, which includes the power of attorney, the healthcare packet, and that last will and testament, then we're talking about the additional things. First and foremost, because our kids, our minor children, are indeed the most precious things that we need to be mindful of. It's a standby guardianship designation. That is a designating someone who's going to be the guardian in the, as we say, standby, before the courts can be involved, right? Before the courts get their self together. And sometimes, because we said probate is a while, it takes some. We had, unfortunately, we had a situation where parents were killed in a car accident in May 2022 with 2 minor children. We didn't get into court until October 2023, right? Granted, it was COVID, and so there was a lot of backup. But I encourage people to be very thoughtful and strategic about identifying, putting those things in place that can bridge the gap of time before the court can be involved, because you want to make sure that you identify the people who are going to be the guardians, and you want to be the one who's going to appoint them, because you don't want just the first person to volunteer, or the way the government system structures it, because sometimes the government will not let someone volunteer if the child is a minor child or a very young child and cannot speak for themselves. Then they may identify someone through the foster care system. So I encourage people minor children, to make sure they have a standby guardianship designation, which is the gap filler for when there is a need to go to court. The second thing, the next two columns are trusts. A trust is a legal document that avoids the probate process. It creates rules on distribution, on how you want those assets to be planned for or distributed. And there's two different categories of trust: the revocable living trust and the irrevocable living trust. The revocable living trust is you have total control, is an extension of you, but it avoids probate. Right. And so one of the reasons why I encourage people to be thoughtful about it is that you can create the rules about how you want those assets can be distributed over time. Right. However, it is an extension of you. If you think about it as a sole proprietorship or a DBA, doing business as a business, that you can just hang out a shingle and say this is something different. And that's a lot like a revocable trust, even though a lawyer should be used to create that trust for you to manage all of those assets. But it's an extension of you, and it uses your social security number during your lifetime, because you're the trustee and it's all basically you're in your control. But when you pass away, it becomes an irrevocable trust. An irrevocable trust, which can be made during your lifetime or as a part of when you've passed away, but you lose some of the control of your asset. It's like a corporation or a limited liability company, and it has its own EIN, which is an employer identification number, because it's its own entity. It has its own, in essence, own personhood. Right, but it has because it's considered not yours in many ways, shapes, or form, because we try to give up some control to separate it from ourselves, like a corporation or a limited liability company does. But it has creditor protection. If someone were to sue you, they don't have access to that. So again, these are two categories of trust. Right. And significant distinction from a will, because when you have a will, remember, it goes through probate. And when it goes through probate, it's part of the court system, and anybody anywhere can read those court documents. So there's no privacy whatsoever when it comes to the will or the probate process. But the revocable and the irrevocable trust are completely private. And the only people who need to have access to it are the people who are parties to it. Right. And then there's strategic business planning. If you have a business, you should have a plan on how those assets should be transferred, how the entity should be transferred when you pass away. Right. Now, again, what I love about the revocable trust is because I'm a little bit controlling, and I'm thoughtful about, you get to create the rules to put into place for the distribution of those assets. Right. And I think about the TV show, The Lottery Winners, right? Where those lottery winners, most of them end up broke. Lottery winners are actually 4 times more apt to file bankruptcy than a typical person. So I encourage people to make sure that they have their stuff, they're planned for. Make sure your money has an assignment, right? I say an inheritance gained hastily at the beginning will not be blessed at the end. And I think of the prodigal son who, got his inheritance too early, and then went and lost it. But that's not atypical. That's not unusual. When you get that big check that you didn't work for, you've often fall into confusion and you do what feels good. And so I encourage people to think about, how do I want to protect that? These are extreme examples with the Melendez brothers, right? That they sort of lost their mind and they killed their parents. But I can tell you how many folks I know who end up buying high-end luxury cars when they get this big check. Right. And I encourage people to be thoughtful about, how do we really want to protect those folks to make good decisions? Because so often that's the last thing. When you get that big check of money, it seems bigger than it is. But it goes quicker than you thought. right? And so the difference between the living trust, which can be revocable or irrevocable, or a will, the living trust, it avoids probate. It's a private thing. It's asset protection for your beneficiaries, and it provides for distributions to beneficiaries over time. One of the things that I love to tell people is to think about when you have that life insurance, that beneficiary of the life insurance, if you have a great direct check, what we know, again, the probability is great that that check's going to disappear very quickly. And with a will, there's probates required. There's no privacy. Praise the Lord for the significant attorney's fees, but there's delays. So that typically you're not going to get through probate in less than a year. And oftentimes it's 3 years. So I encourage people to be thinking about that. And then there's no asset protection. As it's created that your creditors get the first bite of the apple before your loved ones get it. So I encourage people to be thinking about, how do I protect my loved ones, right? And then the revocable trust versus an irrevocable trust. Revocable trust terms can be changed over time. Now, the irrevocable trust, it can be changed, but it takes a whole lot more planning to make that happen. And there's a whole lot more flexibility in the revocable trust. And the main drawback is that the asset still counts as a part of the estate. Depending on where you live, that may be a question about estate tax exemption. And depending on where there are places where I think New Jersey is 2 million, can't remember for Pennsylvania right now, but anything above that is taxed at a significant amount depending on the jurisdiction, right? But if it's in an irrevocable trust, it doesn't count as yours. And why that's important when we're planning for long-term care, when we're planning for people with special needs, all of those things, we need to be thoughtful about how do we protect our loved ones going forward, as well as ourselves, because sometimes when we need it, we need to have it protected from predators. And Jesus said to them, give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what's God's. And they were amazed at him. So you're supposed to pay the taxes that you're supposed to pay. But I am a big advocate of being mindful of those things that you're supposed to pay and take advantage of those things that you don't have to pay. If you don't have to pay it, we shouldn't pay it. A good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children. And so when I tell you about multi-generational wealth building, it's not that we just leave it for our kids through a will, but that we should be thoughtful for our grandchildren. We should be building up for our grandchildren. It's indeed a blessing to our children when we plan it for our children's children. But what we know is the definition of wealth is not about the next generation, but it's multiple generations. And how do we build that up? How do we structure such that our plan can benefit multiple generations? And we can do that only if we create a significant plan. I always like to spend some time on real property because, one, Freddie Mac is here, so that's a good reason. But secondly, most often our net worth is tied into our real property. Real property appreciates and money evaporates. So I like to encourage people to be thinking about how do we preserve it, because we know they're not making any more land, but they keep making more people. So we need to be thinking about how do we protect our stuff accordingly. So what we know, again, is legacy building. If I have one house to leave and I have 3 children to leave it to, what's going to happen? If I leave one house to put 3 kids' name on the deed, what's going to happen in that case? More often than not, one of the kids' spouses, because your kids won't do it, your kids are perfect, but one of the kids' spouses will say, we need to get money out of that house. We need that, our third. And so, as I said, again, property appreciates, money evaporates. And so there are many times we want to keep that family house. And so I encourage people to put that into a trust, because as long as any one person of a joint ownership says we need to sell, it needs to be sold or bought out. And those are the things that are troubling, right? Because we want to make sure that we're building legacy. Then capital gains. I encourage people not to put your children's name on the deed with you. And why that is that for there's 3 reasons typically, but the biggest one is for capital gains tax. 95% of the time, I don't want you to put your kid's name on the deed with you, because the capital gains is the difference between what you buy something for and what you sell it for. When you buy a real property, and I use my neighbors because it's an extreme example, my neighbor across the street, they bought their house across the street in Northwest DC. They bought the house for $17,000 like 55 years ago. Now the house is worth 700. I'm going to say, for my math's sake, $717,000. The difference between what you buy it for and what you sell it for is the capital gain. If they sell that house now while they're alive, the difference is $700,000, and they got to pay tax on that $700,000. And I encourage people to not do that, because if you transferred that property with a life estate deed or a transfer on death deed to your child when you passed away, they would be able to have what we call that tax basis of $700,000 in that example. It is what you buy it for and what you sell it for. It's what they get, what is called a step up in tax basis. Again, I don't want you to put your kid's name on the deed 95% of the time, because I want your child to get the step up in tax basis. If they were to ever sell it, it's as if they bought it for that $700,000. Right. Then the other reason is if that child, gets in a messy divorce, that property could be perceived as community property, as well as if that child is in a car accident and they're responsible, then someone could put a lien on your house because they are responsible, right? Now, JTROS is joint tenancy with right of survivorship. I call that the last man standing law. So if I am married and I buy a property, we buy it in joint tenancy with a right of survivorship, which means that if my husband dies first, in this case, he's a Black man in America, so there's a chance, then I am the sole owner of that property because it's the last man standing. And that's typically fine when we have a solid nuclear family. However, my family is a blended family. And so if indeed my husband predeceased me, the house was solely mine, and then I didn't have any alternative plan, but I just gave it directly to my two children, his children would be left out. So I encourage people to be thinking it through. We want to honor the relationships of our spouses or the people that we are living with, but we want to make sure, or own a property with, but we also want to make sure that our kids or the heirs get what we think they should deserve. We need to respect all of those relationships accordingly. And now the reverse mortgage. So often people get reverse mortgages, and number one, don't tell anybody. So if you are 65 years old and older, if you have equity in your real property, you can pull out that equity as a loan, right, as a mortgage, but it's reverse. You don't got to pay it back. You pulled out the equity, and if indeed you don't pay it back, it continues to gain interest. And the longer you gain interest, the more the debt is. Unfortunately, we've had circumstances where people don't tell their children that they have a reverse mortgage, and unfortunately, that they're surprised at that, because the mortgage is due when the person passes away or when they've not lived in the house for about 9 months. Unfortunately, if you don't know, you're surprised, and then you have to either sell the property, and if you or refinance it, right? If you don't know what it is, if you don't know the amount, then you're not prepared. You're not positioned accordingly. So I encourage people to tell their children that there is a reverse mortgage. Many times we've had children who choose to pay the interest, and as a result, they continue to maintain the equity in the property and then can plan for it. Now, charitable giving, as I was mentioning earlier, if there's an inheritance tax and you want to leave a house to someone, and there's an inheritance tax, oftentimes we have people who lose the property because they can't afford the inheritance tax. As a result, we want people to be thinking about, can we give it to charity if they don't have the wherewithal to either maintain the property or maintain the inheritance tax? So I encourage people, we don't just want it to just go through probate and evaporate. I want people to be thoughtful about giving to charity when, at all possible, because I know that if indeed we are planful, we know that we can shore up our institutions that make our life worth the great lives that we have. right? And I'm going to talk just a bit about Medicaid planning because that's one of the ways in which we lose our property often and our assets. Now, I say this to people because so often we don't know. And so if our loved one goes into a nursing home or needs home-based care, what will happen is that they will say, spend down all of your assets and then we will give you care. I encourage people to, one, talk to someone who can answer that differently, because indeed you're not eligible for care if you have more than $2,500 often, but we can protect it, right? Because you have $2,500 in medically eligible, then that's how you can get the services that you need. However, and many times we can convert those assets out of your name. There is indeed a 5-year look back period for Medicaid. And when we think about how do we want to plan for it, we can sometimes put those things in an irrevocable trust, and then it doesn't count as yours. But we have to be thoughtful and strategic in building out the strategy to make sure those assets that used to be counted against you are no longer countable. Your primary residence is not countable. And so just a second. Your primary residence and your house your car isn't countable. However, when you pass away, someone passes away and they receive long-term care, what will happen is that the state keeps track of every dollar that was spent, and they want to recover that money, and then they put a lien on your house. So remember when I said 95% of the time, I don't want you to put your kid's name on the deed. This is that 5% of the time I do. Because then if your kid is on the deed, your biological child or biological or adopted child's name on the deed with you, then they cannot put a lien on it to recover from Medicaid, right? And then finally,
Amy, on that one. So if you have I'm taking notes. So is that the case? If you have a transfer on death deed, does that also protect the house?
That also avoids probate. Yes.
So there's 3 reasons why you want to have a transfer on death deed that I've caught, and I'm sure there's many more than that. So just want people to be aware of that.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly. And finally, we'll talk about businesses, because all of us should have a side business before benefits. And so we should also be planning to avoid the court process. And so we talk about the 5 Ds of business succession planning. That should be written in that plan. Death, disability, divorce, departure, and dissolution. Now, most of us will say, I'll never get divorced, but we need to plan for it. I'm that professional pessimist, not just for you, but also for your children. If they get divorced, you don't want their former spouse to have access to your assets as well. So I encourage people to have that business succession plan, because we want it to pass peacefully without going through that probate process. And now we are ready for any other questions that people have, and I'm going to stop sharing. Questions? Are there any questions?
All right, so I was taking notes. So here we go.
I was going to say, can I ask a question, or did you already?
No, go for it. Go for it.
Amy, there's a lot of information online about actually creating documents yourself. But what I keep hearing, and I want to impress upon everybody, is you use the word carefully, intentionally, in creating a strategy. So could you talk more about items that are available online and how we should proceed?
So, that's such an amazing question. I thank you so much for asking it. Now, people think that I say this answer because I'm a lawyer, right? And I am indeed biased, but I will tell you that I actually have tried a number of those sites just so that I could be informed. And the biggest gap that's missing is that you don't have anyone who's going to ask you the right questions, right? And what I know that each and every plan is specific to you and the people that you love. If no ChatGPT or trust is going to ask you, so tell me about your child. What are their passions? What are their idiosyncrasies? And be able to transform the plan with those folks in mind, right? So you're not going to get that. In addition, they're not going to talk about, while we can say that there are tax considerations, but we also are not going to say, it's just like, yeah, the more specific that you want, the greater that you want to have impact for your family, the more you want to have someone who's going to talk to you and build it out accordingly. Because I tell you that my children are very different one from another, and I only have two, right? And so, but how I can serve them are each very different. The plans that I have for them are very different, and my grandchildren are very different. So we need to plan with that in mind. You can get a cookie cutter approach, and and I don't say that to be disrespectful, but you are mindful of what you're getting, what you invest in. And so I think about all of the time, people say, I can get it for $1.99. Yes, you can. That what we can get from the dollar store isn't necessarily the same quality of the thing that we're going to get. We're going to get something that's customized. That off the rack stuff is not going to fit you the same way that a custom made is going to be. But you get to make the decision as to what is the most important. If everybody gets to make that for themselves, right?
So, drinking from the fountain of knowledge, gotta ask, so can a trust avoid the debt notification required by a will?
Absolutely.
Benefit of a trust. Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
That's one.
It because again, it doesn't go through probate. And so there's no creditor period. It's like, so if I don't have, let's say I died, and I will, nobody has the authority to even open my mail, right? You cannot open my American Express bill when I've died, unless you have legal authority to go through the probate process. And if you're avoiding probate, you're not going to do that.
Yep. Okay. Here's another one. Another benefit of a trust is, this is more of a comment, I guess. You set the rules. So in the case of you have children, and let's be honest, not all people are responsible. One child might be more aggressive with spending, while the other one might be more reserved. By setting the rules, you get to protect your heirs from themselves, and you also get to ensure multi-generational access. You're like, this is it, this is what you got, then this amount is going to the next generation. You set the rules.
And let me tell you, one of the things that I forgot to say, what I tried to say, I try to say more common than not, is there are so many different perspectives. One of the things that I encourage people to think about is, now, even if you don't work with me or my firm, no matter where you go, now you're more educated, and so you have greater capacity to have the conversations. What I encourage people to think about is the typical approach is, okay, I have 3 kids, $300,000, each one gets $100,000. Right? I don't want people to think that way anymore. I want people to think about, I have 3 kids, $300,000. We're going to incentivize them to work together to create an enterprise. So we have $300,000 that we can grow to $500,000 collectively. Right? Because when you said, Hermand, about the fact that you have one kid who's savvy and knows how to play the market, knows how to make decisions, and you have one kid who just don't care. Right, just living their best life. But if you can pull the brilliance together, right, because then we can do greater things. We're better together. And we also don't want our one kid who just is clueless to be out there and trying to grovel to the brother or the sister to say, can he give a brother a dime? Right? We don't want to leave anybody behind. We want to raise everybody up. High tide rises all boats, and we can make that happen if we're thoughtful.
So in that, I guess in that same area, your family, and there are some children who are just soft-hearted, and let's say in the example, everybody gets $100,000. There's 3 children. One is like, okay, I'm going to be really good. I'm going to save this. I'm going to buy a house. The other one's out there, I'm going to have Johnny good time. And then the other one is just like, okay, middle of the road. Well, say one of the last 2 spends up their money, then they start calling to their other sibling like, you got all that money, I need some help. By having a trust and setting the rules, you're like, if you blow it, Johnny Goodtime can't get your money. I'm telling you now, can't get your money.
But the other thing is, this is what I try to tell people to do, is we pull the $300,000, give out We're not trying to support your child. We're trying to augment their lives, right? So giving them a percent of the income so that it grows each year, right? And so that they're thoughtful about, okay, we have 300,000, we can buy a commercial property together and we can make that investment. That's the conversation, creating a trust council so they can make decisions collectively. I encourage people to have a financial advisor so that nobody's left out.
So now here's where we get into the enterprise building. You know, you hear about the trust babies, Rockefellers, the Gettys and all that. So here's the deal. I can put one of my retirement accounts when I die and use that to fuel a trust, correct?
Correct. You can use your life insurance to fuel a trust.
Yeah. Life insurance could be another one. And I can include in my rules that they be invested in specific vehicles and that the proceeds of the appreciation of the trust is what gets spent, not the principal. You can mandate that the principal never gets spent so that it always grows. And to your point, it supplements the family. They don't become trust babies and sit back with silver spoons in their mouth and get lazy.
Right. And because the goal is that each generation is better off.
Mm-hmm. And with that rule setting thing, the rules can be, you can pull money off of the appreciation of the proceeds for one of multiple reasons: to buy a house, to go to school, or a medical emergency.
I would say that we say use it for a down payment of the house.
Yeah. Down payment. Yeah, down payment. I'm sorry. Down payment on the house.
Because we're trying to make, and the reason why I say that for folks who are listening is so that we can make sure that our children buy their own house, right? That they have good credit, right? So, and a lot of times the obstacle is that down payment. We want them to have good values. We don't want them to deplete it. If you have a significant assets and trust, okay, the trust can be the funding source, right? They can get the mortgage from the trust, right? If there's that kind of money in it, right? However, we want them to be responsible individuals where they are paying their way, right? That they are contributing to their lives.
And they have skin in the game. Hello?
Could I ask a quick question?
Yes.
All right. One of the questions from an anonymous person is, how much does the average trust cost? That's in our chat box.
That's a great question. And the reason why that's a great question is because the answer is all over the continuum. Where you are versus like who you're going to. Like if you go to a solo practitioner, it'll be much less. If you go to a big firm, it's much more. So it's somewhere along that way. I'd say somewhere between $3,000 to $15,000, right? Dollars is the range, right? Depending on who you go to and how it is, how they charge. Now, I encourage people to get a flat fee kind of relationship because otherwise people get afraid to talk to the lawyer, right? If you're paying by the hour, you don't really want to ask any questions, right? So I encourage people to go for a flat fee so that you can make sure you have every question that you have answered.
Aimee.
Thank you both. Go ahead, Emma.
How do you recommend people going about the business of qualifying the person that they work with?
So there are a couple things that I encourage people to think about. First and foremost is if it's a solo practitioner, and I said that because those folks are less expensive, right? And they say, I specialize in estate planning, Hebrew, divorce, criminal, personal injury, 47 different things. You know, they don't specialize on anything, right? And we want someone who has a narrow but deep knowledge base because you want them to know all of the things that can make your life better. So I encourage people to, again, check out if it's an individual, if it's a solo practitioner, and they have a focused practice. That's an important piece. The other part about that is if they are a solo, what is their backup? Because if something happens to them, and we've had that experience, people have come to us because the person that they were working with retired, passed away, or got disabled, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't know where to go. So understanding that's a question that you should have. The third thing is make sure their values are aligned with yours, right? Because I tell people all of the time, our core values are faith, excellence, relationship, service, and trustworthiness. We are biased in that way. Everybody has a bias. find out what their biases are, and make sure that they're in alignment with yours.
Awesome. So now we're trying to make everything go right and go well. What are some common mistakes you've seen people make, or they may have gone one place and they come to you and you're like, oh, this is all jacked up? What are some common mistakes? To be forewarned is to be forearmed. So I want to arm folk.
The first mistake is, again, not doing anything. That's the biggest mistake, not doing anything. You get this information and you just say, okay, I'm going to get around to it. That's the biggest mistake. The second biggest mistake is having an attorney that you don't jive with. Right. And it seems like a sort of a silly thing, but you really got to like them, because you got to tell them the dirt, right? You got to tell them you can't show up and be the perfect person and then expect them to provide to you real information. But you have to be comfortable enough to tell them all your stuff, right? To tell them the truth about who you are and who your children are and your loved ones are, and that who you trust and who you don't trust. All of that is real. And so, and then sometimes, and I think the third thing, and I'm going to stop with this, is being penny wise and pound foolish, right? Saying that I encourage people, you won't select a physician based on their cost, right? You don't go for the cheapest anything when it's important to you, right? We don't typically buy the cheapest car, right? The things that have impact and value, give it the value that's, if it's not valuable to you, then it's okay. But if you value this, make sure you put the relevant amount investment in it. Investment in the time, investment in the to select the right person, the energy that it takes, all of that.
Okay. I'm gonna give you another one. One of the challenges we know that keeps people stymied and unable to move forward is, you identified it up front, the family, oh, I'll let them, I'll be dead, I don't care. How do you have any coaching, any counsel as to how people can start the conversation and overcome objections where they say, I can't talk about it right now?
So this is what I encourage people to do, is not, so often people say, I don't want to talk about death. Let's not talk about death. Let's talk about life. Let's talk about the life and the impact. And I say to people that the people who do not need an estate plan are people that nobody loves and they don't love nobody. But if you care about somebody, then you know that you're going to have a negative impact. If you care about them, do what you need to do. But don't focus on your life ending, focus on their life going on.
I like that. Good one. Good one. I know I picked up some big pearls. Just stuff. I'll share my notes. The whole transfer on death deed, that's the showstopper right there. I mean, the ability to avoid certain taxes, the appreciation protection against that the capital gains tax, the inheritance tax protection, that was cool. I'd ask people to understand, you said that they could start as young as 18 if they have anything to look at having an estate plan. You should also think about, how often should a person look at reevaluating their estate plan?
So we're, as we get older, time goes by so much more quickly. And so people often say, oh, every few years. Now, to me, I'm amazed that this is already middle of March, right? And so what we've done as our firm is, and I encourage everybody to do this, is do this annual touch base. We have an annual planiversary thing where it's like every year we want you to reach out to us and say, do I still like the people I love? Do I still have the things that I have? So that's why, I encourage people to do that every year. That's our practice as a firm, but I encourage everybody to do that as well.
Ooh, all right. I would also, when you were talking about creating your estate plan, I want people to really think about who they select to be a part of their estate plan, not just the beneficiaries. I'm talking about the roles you assign to people. For example, if you are a person and you have to have a power of attorney, at some point, if you have an end of life clause that says, pull the plug on this, that, and the other, make sure that you have the person who's going to be able to say, yeah, pull the plug, because they may be like, I can't do it. No, I'll be back tomorrow. And you look up 3 years later, I'll be back tomorrow. It's not going to work.
Right.
So think about the personalities and the ages and the HIPAA waiver. Here's the other thing. You know, there are a lot of industries, there are a lot of things that we deal with that we put off on the back burner because we're not subject matter experts.
Mhm.
When it comes to health and healthcare, if you have a friend, a good friend that's a doctor, you might want to include them in your HIPAA waiver so that they can interact with the doctors, hear what's going on, and break it down for the family when they're working through their emotions in understandable, digestible terms. My family, we have a couple of close family friends that are doctors. They're on my HIPAA waiver. So I look, I need you to break it down and just say, look, am I living? Am I not? If I'm not, pull the plug. Don't spend the money. Stuff to think about. Go ahead. I see LaTanya. I'm gonna be quiet.
We have another question in the chat for you, Amy.
Mhm.
You mentioned earlier that there was a problem with the trust that you had received. They would like to know if you could talk a little bit more about what you have seen in other
Oh,
trusts.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So the most common is there are these trust mills that I'm convinced. I don't know who does them, that it doesn't have rules. They just they're incomplete for all intents and purposes in my mind's eye. They don't give direction on what you want to happen. And so while it will put assets in the trust, it has the sort of bare bones of a skeleton, but doesn't have the flesh that gives it the soul, the values, and the instructions that we need to go on. That's number one. Number two, it doesn't manage for tax purposes. It doesn't create the tax strategic planning, and it doesn't do multi-generational visioning. And then the biggest problem is that they're cookie cutters oftentimes, that they're people who don't really understand, and they just do, they don't understand the possibilities and opportunities. And they have no vision themselves. So they don't create an opportunity for multi-generational wealth building, strategic planning, any of those things that would enhance the life of the family. So in a nutshell. So I get passionate when I talk about that. And
in that example, can you give us some examples of like what would be ideal trust rules or something that would help?
see, again, you're asking me, there are some things, but I mean, it's a lot about based around the family. But again, principally, how do you gain greater assets? Right. So in thinking about that, but I also want to make sure that we always try to identify the safety nets as well. Right. One of the basic things, though, that I say, if you have multiple kids, you don't let one kid. Today's a great example. I had this conversation with this family. And the parents have this amazing 5-bedroom house. If they pass away and the kids are now, of grown age, I'm not going to have a single kid move into this 5-bedroom house, right? Even though the parents have paid for it. It's paid for. What I would suggest is that we rent out this house and we buy a house or someplace for the other kid to live in. So they're never homeless if they're not able to provide for themselves, where they're never homeless, but we're not going to exploit an asset that could be better used, right? If we can rent this house for $4,000, this kid who ain't got a job needs to be in a 1-bedroom something, right? And so we need to be thoughtful about it. And then if we have a kid who, let's say we have a modest 3-bedroom house, and they have a family and they want to move in the house, but they got to pay a percentage of the fair market rental value because the other 2 kids should not be without because this kid decided to move in. They shouldn't lose their part of their income, right? Their trust benefits. So those are some of the things I would think about.
Okay. So you can dictate the type of withdrawal, principal or appreciation, the amount of the withdrawal on a percentage basis. You can take out 10% of the appreciation, whatever. You can dictate the frequency of the withdrawal and the purpose of withdrawal. Okay. All right. That's what I get.
Add-on question. Armand, you mentioned putting. Sorry. You mentioned putting.
I think your computer's working now.
I think your phone and your computer's working. I think so. You got to mute one. There you go.
You mentioned putting your retirement in the trust as a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
You can make the trust the beneficiary. Is that your retirement? Is that how it works, Amy?
Yes, because you don't you're not going to take it all out because it's a taxable event, but it can be that the beneficiary is your trust, like your life insurance, the beneficiary should be your trust, right? And so that you can plan it accordingly.
Thank you.
So
I am
I want
learning new
everybody to get,
strategies.
I'm sorry, get
And
excited.
one of the other
because-
things I tell people is that for those of us, when we have a grandchild, we should buy life insurance on our grandchildren right away. Because remember, the cheaper it is when they're the youngest. And so if it's in the trust, owned by the trust, but and it's got to be some cash flow that they can use it for college, etc. But when they pass away, and they will, as heartbreaking as it may seem, it goes back into the trust to build up for multiple generations.
So the thing that gets me excited about this session, we talk about wills and estate planning, but we also talk about strategies for wealth building, strategies that everyday folk, especially if they work for an organization that provides benefits like, you know, death benefits with insurance, like 401, 403B plans, like, you know, savings plans, you can use that to really build wealth for your family. Here's the thing we got to get comfortable with. We got to be comfortable of being the foundation for wealth that we'll never realize, but our heirs will. We got to change our mindset in terms of, I'm going to do this hard work now so that my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, my great-great-great-grandchildren, whom I will never meet, will say, man, you know, great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa was a sharp dude, and I really appreciate him. Just something to think about.
I just got a new question in the chat. If you have 4 children, do you just assign one to be in charge or a backup, or do you need to?
So, good question. Now, the answer is it depends. If you have, again, I always encourage people to have them working together so they have a benefit, right? So that they're thoughtful, right? And so we have what I call a trust council. You identify a lead, like again, the council, who's going to be the chair, but you pick someone who's going to be smart. Now, so let's say I'm going to use that example. You have 4 kids, and because we want this multi-generational. Of those 4 kids, they're all on the council, but they select a chair. That chair also can be removed, right? Because if they're not doing what they need to do, they can be dethroned. But I also encourage people to have on their council a financial advisor and an accountant, right? So that you're having the wealth of knowledge, the trusted advisors. The scripture says, in the multitude of counsel, there is safety. So we're having those people who have that subject matter expertise right there. And so that they're part of the conversation annually, at least. And so that we're building that wealth thoughtfully and we're not avoiding those taxes.
So
But
now,
you can have, again, if your children don't have the capacity, the wherewithal to make those decisions, they can bring an external chair in. And now, so then also think about, let's say each of those 4 kids, each have 4 kids. They get to select, because this trust is going to have multi-generational wealth building. So each one can have, each of these branches can identify a representative to be on the council. So that's when we talk about this multi-generational strategy for wealth building.
and so what's really cool is your trust council is not necessarily made up of family members. It can, but it doesn't have to be. And you can have advisors who are subject matter experts in accounting, in law, in medical benefits. You might have to pay them, but
right.
But
it's an investment.
It's worth it. It's worth it. Absolutely. Any other questions? This is fun.
There's one more. I think it says, do you even have to have someone if you work with a financial planner? And I'm thinking
the financial planner doesn't do the law part, right? The financial planner, and unfortunately, I used to do coaching for financial advisors, and unfortunately, they don't necessarily have the information. I'll never forget talking to a financial advisor who said, "Oh, you know, I've got all this covered. They're just going to put beneficiaries on all of their stuff." Now, what we know is it's like winning a lottery, and that money's going to be gone. So you need to have the subject matter experts that expand beyond just the financial, because I can write a great estate plan, but I can't tell you how to make that $47.50 grow. Right.
Yep. Awesome. Awesome.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, I don't see any more in the chat, but please feel free to place them in. So you guys, you are getting expert counsel for free. This is a consultation session that
No,
I
it's an
didn't plan
education
for.
session. It's not a consultation.
Education. But I'm ready to make changes in my trust right now. So I feel
This is great. This is great.
Info I can implement, Amy. So thank you.
So as you start to consider your last rounds of questions, Eric, can we give them access to the survey, please? I want to ask people to please, give us your feedback about this session. Give us any ideas you might have. We're always striving to do and be better. So if you can give us that feedback, we greatly appreciate it. And certainly feel free to come at us with any additional questions. Okay. Eric says he doesn't have the survey.
Would you like me to put your information in the chat so that if anyone wants to follow up to do a future educational session?
If you could do that, I would appreciate you. I want to thank you, Amy, for being amazing as always. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for your perspective. Before we close this evening, I do have some housekeeping I want to take care of. I want to ask you again to remember to take that survey. We don't have it, but if you contact me, I'll send it to you. I want to share some information about additional faith-based alliance events on the horizon. Last year, we collaborated on several financial empowerment summits. Now, these are in-person events that are hosted. Oh, hello.
If you want, I'm gonna come.
Eric, we can hear you. Oh,
Pardon me.
No problem. No problem. These are in-person events that we host in collaboration with our faith-based alliance partners. These financial empowerment summits, they've been so successful that we planned several for this year, 2024. On May 2nd through May 4th in Jacksonville, Florida, the NFCC, in collaboration with our member agencies, Family Foundations and In Charge, will be hosting a 3-day financial summit sponsored in part by Bank of America, Freddie Mac, and others. We've got and the Wells Fargo Foundation on May 17th through May 18th in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in collaboration with Mount Zion Baptist Church of Philadelphia and Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church of Philadelphia. We'll be hosting a 2-day financial summit. Details are going to be posted on the NFCC's website soon. And to get to our website, you can go to nfcc.org. Again, that's N as in Nick, F as in Frank, C as in Charles, C as in Charles.org. And now, as relates to this evening's presentation, I want to say thank you to our supporters, Freddie Mac, the Wells Fargo Foundation, and TD Bank. I want to thank the Planning Committee. I want to thank our partners, Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church, the Mount Zion Baptist Church of Philadelphia. If you want to review a recording of tonight's presentation, the presentation information will be on our website. Do we have, Eric, do you have the resources that you can post?
Yes, all that can be accessed from the faith-based landing page, which is nfcc.org/faith-based. I just posted that in the Q&A, but you should be able to access our additional resources, past education sessions recordings, which will be the place where tonight's recording will be posted.
Cool. Thank you, sir. I want to thank our presenter, Amy. Amy, is there anything else you want to say to the people?
I
Oh,
want to,
there you go. There you go. You're good. You're good.
I just wanted to say, do something, right? Take a step, move forward, be a change. You know, Yeah, just step out. You know, I know that it's difficult. I know that's hard, but if you have any questions about where you can find someone, reach out to us at the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals, because we have relationships in most of the states, not Montana, but most other states we have somebody.
There you go. There you go.
All right.
LaTanya, you got anything you want to say?
I echo Amy's remarks to definitely reach out, start today, ask a question. We've placed Herman's information in the chat. Please reach out to NFCC, reach out and let us know what you're thinking. If you have a church home that you would like to get this information to, we also are available to come and talk with your participants. If you need financial literacy, please reach out. CreditSmart.com, FreddieMac.com is available to you. I'll put it in the chat for you, and this is great.
Awesome.
Thank you, Herman and Amy.
Thank you.
And Pastor Cedric Jones, I have to humbly just thank you for just always, welcoming us into the religious community. That is not something that has been easy for many companies, and we salute you, Pastor Jones, because you make this information available to your flock, and we can't do it without you, so thank you.
I also got to thank Reverend Kevin Murphy of Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church and Pastor Waller. They've been wonderful in welcoming us and making all this possible. I want to thank some of our members who weren't here: Cora Fulmore, Diversified Resource Network, Pam Peterson, also of the NFCC. I thank you, our listening audience, for taking time to join us and giving us your kind attention. I ask that you have an amazing, amazing evening and rest of your life. If you need to contact me, you got my information. I thank you, and I wish you a great good night.